Hi, my name is Jim and I was retired. Recently a reader wrote, on a side note, does the market correction, such as the one we had in the last week, worry you as a retiree? And I replied that not with my 3-bucket system. So I thought I'd use this video to talk about my 3 buckets and specifically what's in bucket 1. Many people use a bucket system in retirement, and sometimes it's 2 buckets and sometimes it's 3 buckets. And for everybody with a 3-bucket system, everybody has their own little unique twists to it. Remember these? I have 2 sets of 3 buckets. The first are the time buckets that most people are familiar with. Bucket 1 is for assets that I will use in the next 3 years. And that's the one we'll be talking about in this video. Bucket 2 are assets that are dedicated for years 4 through 8. 5 years worth of assets that produce income that I don't need to sell quickly. I can let them be for a while. And then bucket 3 is where most of my equity is, long-term assets for long-term needs. Now, I can realize capital gains and income from bucket 3 to support bucket 1, but I don't need to touch any of these assets in the next 8 years. So 9 years plus for bucket 3. Now, I also have a set of 3 buckets for taxable accounts, for tax-free accounts, Roth, and for tax-deferred accounts, IRA and 401k. Those are tax buckets, and they include some things that are in bucket 1, 2, and 3 in the times. Now, I should say that if you need to go back to the spreadsheet, look at my prior video on managing asset allocation across all my buckets. That'll explain how I use Quicken for Mac and then download that data into a numbers spreadsheet so that I can look at my asset allocation over time and across those buckets. I should say that Quicken recently introduced a dashboard in their application, which does show you a pie chart of asset allocation for investments. And that and the data as of date function that they have, that allows you to take a look back at your asset allocation for your investments over time to see how it's changed, as I'm doing here in this slide. But the numbers aren't exactly right because they don't include my cash held outside of the investments. That's why this pie chart represents my asset allocation across all of my buckets. Here's a view of the 3 time buckets. And again, it shows you bucket 1, 17% of my assets. Bucket 2 is about 30% of my assets. And the remaining is in bucket 3. And these bar charts give you a quick little asset allocation of each of the buckets, showing bucket 1 is a little bit of domestic bond, a little bit of CD, and mostly cash. This is the tax buckets, the same picture, but by tax buckets. Tax deferred makes up most of my assets. Taxable is about 20, and Roth 401k and Roth IRA are about 10%. Now, like many people my age, we didn't have a Roth 401k option at work. So I'm a little behind on Roth, but I'm doing conversions and I hope to increase this number over time. So for this video, I dove in deeper to look at those assets in bucket 1 to give you a picture of what it's like. Here are 2 pie charts to show bucket 1. This one shows you that the tax deferred is about 45% of the bucket, 55%, is taxable accounts. This shows you the asset allocation. Mostly cash, 67% cash, 13% bonds, and again, those are I bonds and VTIP, short-term VTIP. And then 21% are CDs that will mature in the next couple of years. Taxable accounts are mostly 58% cash, 16% bonds, and in this case, it's mostly the I bonds, and this is CDs, 25%. Tax deferred, it's mostly the VTIPs here in the tax deferred. 15% is maturing CDs in the next couple years, and 77% is cash. It's too high, and I will be deploying this into more bond funds and CDs. I'm just waiting for rates to get a little better than they are now. Because that 77% of cash in a tax-deferred account is because I am still in the process of reallocating assets from the rebalancing that I did in the first few weeks of January. The market did not look good to reinvest in equity, so I'm holding it on the sideline until it looks a little bit sure about what direction I should be going. If we get another 5 or 10% drawdown, I'll be ready to invest some of this back into bucket 3 and rebalance my buckets again. Playing around with the numbers charts and creating these pie charts from my portfolio by bucket spreadsheet, I was able to do one last chart, which I'm kind of proud of. What's in my bucket 1? Here's a stacked cylinder chart, a bucket, that shows you the assets that make up bucket 1. They include the taxable CD, taxable cash, mostly in the bank, and a little bit of I bonds that will have to be taken from my Treasury Direct account when I need them. Assets in bucket 1 also include the tax-deferred CD, the tax-deferred cash, and the tax-deferred bonds. I balance my asset allocation and my 3 buckets on a quarterly basis. I usually take income out of tax-deferred about twice a year. There's enough in bucket 1, most of it in my high yield savings accounts, that I keep just enough money in my checking account to pay the bills, and then once a month get a transfer from my Marcus high yield savings account. If I need to replenish the Marcus, I've got my I bonds and the CDs that are maturing to do that, or another tax-deferred strategic withdrawal later this year. We'll see how it goes. But the thing is, I can relax not worrying about the market because I know I have enough assets in bucket 1 to tide me over. Now, another issue people have with bucket 1 is, well, that's a lot of cash. But as you can see, 1 year is in cash, and temporarily the second year's in cash, but I'll be deploying that into bucket 2 assets or bucket 1 assets that are short-term CDs. But it's not all cash. It's cash and cash equivalents that are in bucket 1. The second thing people worry about in a bucket system is bucket 3 income must flow to bucket 2, and then that must flow into bucket 1. I replenished bucket 1 at the beginning of this year by selling assets. I had way too much equity after doing the pension purchase option to my fixed income assets. So I sold bucket 3 assets and put it into bucket 1. But the bucket 3 assets were up a lot. Made sense. Likewise, bucket 2 assets can be sold and put into bucket 3. It's not a cascade waterfall going one direction. Now, bucket 1 only has funds from my taxable and tax deferred in it. There are no tax-free assets in bucket 1. Tax-free assets in the Roth are meant for bucket 3 long-term needs. So that's where you'll find my tax-free assets in bucket 3. Bucket 2 is going to have a lot more tax-deferred assets, but some taxable accounts. And I've got some taxable investments that are in bucket 3 too. So you can't think about these buckets as this is just cash, and bucket 2 is just bonds, and bucket 3 is long-term equities. In fact, I've got long-term equities in bucket 2 and 3, and I've got taxable things in all 3 of those buckets. Will a 3-bucket system work for everyone? I can't tell you that. I'm not a professional. I have no initials after my name. So just take this as entertaining ideas from one educated consumer to another. Do your own due diligence and seek out a professional if you need one. Hey, and be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. The more subscriptions it gets, the higher it will be in the search results. Thanks.